Today we have another young Indian as part of the Voice of the Young series. Hello everyone, good to be with you once again. Today we have Aritro Bhattacharya. He's very interested in demography, which is population studies. Let's hear from him.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Mathur, for giving me this opportunity. It really means a lot. And to start off, like talking about myself, I would say that firstly, I did my bachelor's in statistics, which is quite interesting given the fact that I'm working on a domain that's a bit different from usually where statisticians end up. But I would say that I developed this deep interest for demography from a module that we were taught during our undergraduate days, which was on demography. It was like a very primitive course on demography. It just introduced us to the basics of population studies, which included the three population events like migration, mortality, and fertility. But nothing greatly in detail. But I think what really interested me was the fact that here for the first time, I saw the application of statistics on a social field.
Okay.
And that really interested me because so far in basic statistics, whatever I was reading, mostly in inference, was purely theoretical, and it had a hypothetical application for, or even if there was a social application with real life data, it was mostly business oriented data.
Okay.
But for the first time, I started realizing that, oh, you can use statistics in research on people.
Okay.
And that was really interesting because before that, I had no clue about demography, that a subject of this stature existed in the world. So that really interested me. And then after finishing my bachelor's, I looked at what the next step could be. A lot of my friends and family members asked me to pursue a master's in statistics or maybe data science, something which is really prevalent now. But I found out this program, Masters in Biostatistics and Demography at IIPS Mumbai. And after going through the coursework, I think I was really interested, and it seemed like a good interdisciplinary course. It wasn't entirely demographical. It also had a lot of statistics in it. And I think that is one of the reasons why I decided that, oh, let's try this out. And I think I gave the exam and I got in, and then started the lockdown. So most of the other entrances for the other universities got postponed. And this was, I'm talking about 2020.
Yeah.
So as a result, the classes at IIPS, because the entrance exam had just taken place before the lockdown. So IIPS was on track. It wasn't delayed by the pandemic and the lockdown. So the classes started. And as the classes started, I got really interested in the subject.
But they were virtual now. The classes were
Yeah,
online.
they were virtual for 3 semesters.
Yeah.
But I think this is again a shout out to my professors at IIPS, that they were very much, I would really give it to them. They were really technologically adept, I would say. And in spite of the limitations of a virtual class, I think they were really capable enough to give out the necessary amount of introductory idea about the subject, and they got us interested really. And after like talking to some of my professors through email and all the virtual means of conversation, I realized how big this field really is. And it's not just, it's not just the study of the population, but it's it's not just numbers. It's so much more than numbers. It's how we perceive. It's how we behave, and what could be the impact of our behavior on the surroundings, and how that can affect the population in numbers. And it's so interconnected and interdisciplinary. I realized that, oh, demography can be economics as well. There's like this huge field in which economics and demography go hand in hand.
Yes.
And then I started reading out a lot of literature because I got really interested in that part of demography in my initial days of my masters. So I started reading out a lot of literature. I discovered causal inference and how that is really a very important uh, domain when it comes to establishing causal effects of, say, an intervention on health outcomes or population outcomes. And then I went through the work of organizations like the IPA and JPAL, and I got really interested in the work of Esther Duflo, Pascal Indupas, and Abhijit Banerjee, especially the work that they have done on behalf of JPAL in Ghana. So, and all of these were highly demographic on one hand, and again economic. Like
Yeah.
they were really establishing relationships which are of great importance when we talk about public health or public policy making. So that got me really interested in the subject, and I come from an academic family.
Okay.
My father's a professor, my grandfather's been a professor, so I always had an interest in the academics of things, in the more research part of things. It's not always that I found a lot of interest in the corporate and in the work, like the
Yeah.
job work, the
Okay.
5 to 9
Understood.
work.
Yeah.
So I was more interested in knowing something,
All right.
researching about it. So that, I think, I would say, helped me in a great way to know more about the subject. And as I moved deeper, I think it became my passion.
Okay.
And right now, I'm really interested in climate migration, something that I have discovered a few months back. And it's fascinating, given that the amount of inequality that exists in our country and how it is getting even more deeper uh, due to the climate change effects
Could
and
you
the
explain
fact
that?
that,
What is climate migration? First time I'm hearing this term. So what is climate
okay,
migration?
so climate migration is basically how we define migration is when a group of people or individuals move from one place to another, mainly due to economic reasons, partly also controlled by psychological and social reasons. But this is the kind of migration that is climate change induced. Like
Okay.
in Bangladesh, what is happening in the Delta region, like I would just, I think it would be better if I go through an example. So
Yeah, sure.
in
Let's go.
Bangladesh, what is happening is that due to global warming, the sea levels are rising.
Yeah.
And in Bangladesh, there are a lot of deltas.
Yes.
And as a result of that, because of the sea level rising, these deltas are now getting submerged.
Right.
They've started to get submerged. And also the incidence of thunderstorms
Yeah.
have increased in Bangladesh, especially. So, as a result of that, there's a direct effect on agriculture.
Okay.
The soil is losing its fertility, and
Hmm.
people in those deltas, living in those deltas, are primarily agrarian.
Yeah.
So, they are facing livelihood problems. The
Okay.
crops that they used to grow and live on, it's not happening.
Okay.
And because of the fact that the sea levels have risen and the whole ecosystem is changing around them, they are facing severe crisis, and as a result of that, to maintain their livelihood and to survive, they're moving away from their place.
Okay.
So this is a case of climate induced migration,
Okay.
and
Aritro,
it's
I
very
remember a
interesting.
word called char. Are these the same things in Bangladesh? They used to call them char, where people were living and then they would face submerging. Or maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Were these?
I'm not too sure about this, but
Okay,
I
fine.
think, okay.
All right, so let's continue. So anyway, from the delta, now the migration is to mainland, which is already crowded.
Yeah, that is already crowded, and this is happening just not for Bangladesh, it is happening in sub-Saharan Africa as well.
Okay.
Because of the increased temperatures now, people are forced to move away from the primarily desert type regions into the towns and cities, which are now overburdened with a population, and they can't provide jobs to all because there's unemployment.
Yeah.
Uh, and now this is creating a situation where it is difficult.
Yeah.
Life in the city is also becoming difficult, and there's a very obvious demographic consequence of this migration, and it is unprecedented
Okay.
because I don't think any demographer thought that this would happen,
Okay.
because global warming in itself is something that's taken huge shape, and we have started to realize, thankfully, now that climate change is important, and that we should be aware of it. But even then, I think the climate change literacy in India mostly is something that's not very high, and that got me really interested in this type of research that could actually find the mechanisms as to what could happen if the climate induced migration takes place, because in India we have a very diverse biological system. We
Yeah.
have areas which are desert like, we have areas which are coastal, we
Yeah.
have the tropical areas. So we have, our ecological reserves are scattered in such a way that we are very much, I would say, at risk of suffering climate induced migration. And
Okay.
India is, as far as I know, the fourth worst hit country due
Okay.
to climate change.
Okay.
And so now neither I or any scientist can revert climate change or stop the process. It's
Okay.
not possible. What we can do is that understand why it happens and what does it mean if it happens.
Okay.
So I think I'm more interested in what are the consequences of this event on the demographics, because if we are looking at the normal demographics of India, cities like Mumbai, cities like Delhi, which are uh, primary, uh, I would say, magnets of migration from
Yeah.
around the country,
Right.
they are already overburdened.
Yes.
I mean, now if suddenly we have this whole group of people moving in from their homes to these metropolises, it would make things even more difficult for the cities. And we are, as a nation, also have to keep in mind the sustainable development goals that we have adopted from the UN,
Yeah.
and how we are going to manage. So I think a lot of it depends on research, causal in its core, which will give out a proper framework of mechanisms as
Mm.
to why it happens, and if it happens, then what.
Okay.
So I think that is the outlook that has interested me. And even though I am still like taking baby steps into the domain, I think I would have to study more. But it is that interest that is constantly driving me, because I think it is important, and it is high time that we shift our focus from uh, the usual conventional things to these issues, because these are directly in link with our existence.
Yeah.
Uh,
You know,
so yeah,
there were floods.
that
So 1/3 of Pakistan was flooded last
absolutely,
year, and
absolutely,
Pakistan is our neighbor. So, the nature is not so different there and here. And if they can
absolutely.
have such a problem, which has never happened before, then we could also have. No, India is much bigger, so some parts of it may be hurt.
In
But
India, even we are having a lot of climate, I would say, instability. If you look at what happened in Uttarakhand,
yes,
in and then even now what is happening at Joshimot,
yes,
the cracks have come up, and
yeah,
it's all because we are either drilling too much in our
yeah,
quest to find the natural resources, or we are just playing God. And nature has its own way of balance. I have always believed this, and the more I'm reading into all the natural disasters that have taken place, and over the period of, say, the last 100 years, nature has found a way to balance its depletion. And that is why I think it is very important that we respect nature, and we also try to understand what it really means. And I think that is one of the reasons which constantly drive me
Okay,
as a
wonderful. All right,
aspiring.
I'm glad to hear it. But let me just ask you, because I know you are one of the first young demographic experts I'm talking to. Well, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. What kind of population policy, if any, does India need at this time?
I think India needs a population policy that that really focuses on inequality and also focuses on research. That is very important because I mean there will be demographers who will come and say, okay, we need to curb the TFR, we need to increase the contraception use prevalence. But I think that we have reached a certain point in modernization where I think we are almost there as a modern society, and we are only going to get better from here because, as you already know, the population growth for India is not that high per year. Every year we are growing by a very small proportion.
Yeah.
So I think we have the growth under control, and the national TFR is 2.1. There are problems with some states, there are problems with some districts maybe, but I think those problems need to be identified and researched upon rather than imposing a law on them or imposing a sort of uh, imposing something on them related to, say, contraception use or any sort of birth control or any sort of uh, birth prevention or population control measures or whatever. I think every region has its own set of problems, and this is something that India needs to identify in its population policies. That I think the policy needs to also be very respectful of the diversity that India has to offer, because the problems that Bihar offers are not equivalent to the problems that Meghalaya will offer,
Okay.
even though both the states are extremely high in terms of their TFRs.
Okay.
So that is something that needs to be taken care of. And also the importance of evidence-based research.
Okay.
What I am really looking at as I go through a lot of literature is that we focus a lot on associative research.
Okay.
If we are interested as demographers, as public health researchers, the work that has been done so far is mostly associative, which means that there's an X, there's a Y, and it's just connecting X with Y.
Okay.
But what I think is more important is to identify if there exists a causal relationship between X and Y.
Okay.
That is important because I think association to a point is intuitive, and it's okay if you find a mathematical representation of it, but it is also important to know what the causes are.
Okay.
And because unless you know what the causes are, you can't be specific with respect to your policy implementation.
Okay.
I mean, there's this one public health problem. There's this one public health program which was introduced to curb anemia in India, because Indian women and young children are highly anemic.
Yeah.
Around 67% as per NFHS 5, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Young women within the reproductive period. So there's this anemia prevention program that the government of India brought out, and that was after NFHS 4.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, after NFHS 4, then NFHS 5 happened, but the prevalence of anemia didn't even change.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that NFHS 4 and NFHS 5 are back to back, so it's a little bit harsh when we say that things didn't work out because the time span between the two is not that much. But even then, the prevalence increased rather. So that is something which is important to note here, is to ask the question as to whether the implementation was specific or not.
Okay.
And whether what it was specific would only be answered if we know the causes, if we know the causal framework. And for that, we need to do impact evaluation studies. There are hundreds of programs undertaken by the Indian government over if I start from 1947 up to 2023, in these
Yeah.
76 years, there are so many programs that have been uh, undertaken, like the ICDS that's there
Yes.
for the nutrition programs
Yeah.
that was introduced in 1975.
Yes.
It's like an umbrella, and then there's the National Health Mission.
Yes.
Under that, there is the National Rural and the Urban Health Mission. So
Yeah.
there are tons of programs, but if you really go to see if there exists any sort of impact evaluation literature, there isn't much.
Yeah.
And whatever there is, it's mostly funded by international organizations
Yeah.
and mostly done by foreign researchers.
Right.
So I think the indigenous research is very important. And
Right.
so any population policy that comes should be more focused on these, because I think we have had enough of impositions. Now it's, I think, high time to discuss why it happens, because I think uh, even after all these impositions, there exists a huge amount of inequality. And if you go through the HDR, the Human Development Report brought out by UNDP, you'd see India ranks pretty low when it comes to the Human Development Report, the Gender Inequality Report, and even the Global Hunger Index report that was brought out this or last year. India ranks around 107 on the Global Hunger Report, which is a cumulative index taking into consideration malnutrition.
Yeah.
Which is another hugely important issue when it comes to India. India has the highest wasting rate in the world, around, say, 19.7%, if I'm not wrong. And that is not how we are going to reach sustainable development goals, no matter how many targets we set in front of ourselves. Those targets have to be defined by evidence-based research.
Okay.
It's not like, okay, we introduce something today and some policy today and say that, oh, we are going to reach all these 17 sustainable development goals by 2030.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen unless we have a roadmap.
Yeah.
And that is why I think evidence-based research requires a lot of importance. And that again brings us to the greater debate as to what's more important. Is it the technology that is more important, or the research which is more important? That is a debate that has always existed there, I would say. But I think those who want to take up academics should be encouraged and provided more opportunities.
Okay, great. It's you're clearly very passionate about it. I'm happy to hear the passion in your voice and in your analysis. The passion is not just passion, it's backed by solid understanding of the literature and of the past, and very well articulated. So it's really nice to hear from somebody who's a budding expert. Maybe you are not yet a fully expert, but it's very nice to hear from a budding expert who understands or at least, has his own view of the methodology and the approach, and is ready to borrow from around the world, right? So you're not just stuck inside, and your professors helped you see the world. So it's really good to know that we have such skilled young people who are passionate about their work, and hopefully you will get a chance to do it your way and to be able to be,
I hope so,
and to be productive.
because I personally think that it's not just India, it's the world, it's the developing world as a whole that is going through very similar problems.
Okay.
And the other places have had research on them, so why not us?
Why not?
Where are we lacking?
Yeah.
So that is, I think, because I personally believe, having went through the literature relating, say, Latin American countries, or say the sub-Saharan and North African countries, they're not very socioeconomically different than us. I mean, we can always make comparisons about the economy, but it's not just the economy, right? It's more than that. And I think when we come to a more socio-political image of our country, we are not very different from them. They
Okay.
might have their own cultures, but the principles of life are not very different. So because we again fall under the same list of, say, middle and lower income countries as
Yeah.
given by the World Bank. So the problems could be identified to be universal, and if they have found a solution and they are trying their best to implement it, then why not us?
Okay. All right. Any final words from you?
Uh, I mean, I've always believed that India should give more impetus to academic research. There should be more flow of capital in it, because there's this distribution difference between, say, a job and the research work. So that kind of puts off people in a way that they find it harder to sustain themselves in research. But I think those problems need to be addressed. And if they are addressed, then I'm sure India would be among the top in the world to in terms of research and design and development, because whether we deny it or not, India has the best minds among the world. I mean, look at the organizations around. I mean,
Yeah.
the head of IMF is an Indian, Geeta Gopinath, and before that we've had Raghuram Rajan. So it's Indians that are leading the world right now, and you should give more place to research. That is
All
all
right.
I have to say.
Okay, great. Thank you, Aritro. This has been
Thank
very
you, sir.
wonderful talking to you. Hearing you as a very motivated person is always good. Let's say bye to the viewers. Maybe we'll catch up with you 1 year later to see what has happened to you.
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, but for the
It's
moment,
great.
bye. And
Bye, sir.
we'll be back with another young person or an expert next time. Bye till then. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, sir.